about Minnesota. When I got involved in politics here, the state was a mystery to me. Uh, I just thought, wow, uh, we're going to support the Constitution and the Republic. And I ran right into a Republican Party that is, deeply collaborative with the uh, Democrat Party here. And that is deeper than politics. That goes into the culture of Minnesota, what they call Minnesota nice.
Yep.
We're a consensus seeking culture. It's been called Yante culture.
Yeah.
And the Republicans are very loath to take a position which could be criticized as nonconformist. And so our state has been sliding left since Wendell Anderson. It was actually a Republican state. And just to tell you about my parents, to let you know how deeply wound into this thing I am, the center of the leftism here in Minnesota is the University of Minnesota. I actually sat in a room in 1969 after McCarthy lost to Humphrey and then Humphrey lost to Nixon. And I sat in a room with a bunch of academics as a 11-year-old kid and watched these academics make a 50-year plan to turn the state basically communist. They didn't think about it as communist at that time. There were a lot of Jewish intellectuals is what they were, with some Yante Lutherans thrown in for good measure. So everybody got together and they made a
That'll
plan.
do it.
Well, they made a plan to take over the university through the tenure process. And so the university has been, spinning out generation after generation of leftist orientated graduates who have then spread out through the state and right down to the kindergarten level. We have a big challenge in front of us because that leftism is wound into the educational system of our state. And so I've got a bird's eye view of how this thing went down. I don't have 50 years. So I want to talk to you about like a 10-year plan that we could, while I'm still viable because I'm still full of piss and vinegar. And I want to give everything I've got because I love the Republic and I love the founding documents when we've painstakingly gone through them here on this podcast. But the one line, a creator that grants unalienable rights, that for me, that's the game right there for me personally. And I want all my fellow citizens in Minnesota to have at least the chance to discover that. So what we're doing in Minnesota now is we're trying to get Royce elected. And you said just as we're going on, do you know Royce personally?
I don't know him personally, but I do know who he is, of course. Anytime you're going to be a candidate, especially for any major statewide office, I'm probably going to hear your name, especially in a state where I'm paying attention and I'm going to be watching because I think that you said give me a 10-year plan. I don't have 50 years. I think Minnesota got left out of some of that what other states had, a couple of years ahead of you guys said, I'm going to need a plan too. And I think Minnesota got left out because Republicans haven't yet allowed themselves to fully believe that the state is flippable. I mean, I don't know why. We've seen several close calls. And I think that when it comes down to it, of course, there has to be some level of persuasion, and people have to believe you when you say, "This is what I believe in. This is what I'm running on." Because this is the policy that I'm going to pursue. This is the agenda I'm going to pursue. I'm still very much a believer that people make rational policy choices, even if sometimes they may not appear to arrive at that decision in a rational way. It still is a rational choice. And I think that Minnesota has, first and foremost, motivation. There is a level of persuasion, but this is a game of motivation at this point. And we have a lot of people who've been orphaned in the process. And when you look at 24 and you look at the states surrounding you, whether it's Wisconsin, Michigan did. I know I worked with a group that put a lot of effort into this. And even Musk and others, they had, of course, efforts in Pennsylvania. You had Turning Point, very much focused on Arizona and some in Wisconsin. But there are a lot of voters who went through the same transition that you just described to listeners, yet they maybe weren't political in nature or certainly didn't have political family. And they were just basically orphaned from the process. Maybe when they were growing up, they thought my family voted Democrat, and then we call it ancestral voting history. That maybe they thought my family voted Democrat, but I don't think they voted for this kind of a Democratic Party, and I'm basically just going to be disconnected from the political process. There are a lot more people in who that describes than most political analysts understand, and certainly most political campaigns understand. So for a long time, this isn't new. It just seemed that in 24 it started to actually sink in to some people. The name of the game is to change the electorate and not just try to persuade it, because what those academics that you sat in the room with 50 years ago, what they tried to do wasn't convince the voters of Minnesota at that time that they were right. They convinced each other that we can make a plan to change who it is that will eventually be voting. And I'm saying there's actually a way for Republicans to do that, and it's not going to take 50 years of indoctrination. There are
Richard,
people
Richard,
who are out.
could
Yeah,
I just interrupt you just because now
sure.
now we are at the coffee shop and I have a question.
Speaking
So
of,
I'm sure you know if I'm sure you know who Dan Schultz is and the precinct strategy.
yeah,
And when I got involved in politics here in Minnesota, what I believe was my role as a party officer was to build out the party infrastructure down to the precinct level so we could get out the vote and so that we could form a community of Republicans. And of course, um, my chair at the time shut that down. And I said, "Why would you do that?" And his answer was, "We don't need any more Republicans. We just need more work from the Republicans we already have." And I was so naive, I did not recognize that that was a power consolidation,
yeah,
protect process. Now I understand it, but I didn't at the time. And what I'm trying to do here in Minnesota, and we're getting better at it. When I went into the process, nobody knew each other. I'm talking about the activists throughout the state. We didn't even know each other's names because the party kept us separated into the little cantons called Senate districts. And we broke that down. I mean, the activists, this kind of media that I'm doing, and of course, what you're doing at a national level. And we're national, but we're really focused on Minnesota. Sorry, my audience, if you're in Tennessee, we're just a model for you. I mean, you got to have a master model of somebody that's willing to go anywhere, any place, anytime to talk to anybody about anything. That's who you're talking to, Richard. That's what I do. So I mean, I'm just at that point that I've just lost it. I mean, I've lost all sense of normalcy. I've given over to this process that you're starting to allude to. And I'm going to ask you, what do you mean? Because I'm
yeah,
starting that out by saying what I'm doing is trying to build out the Republican Party at the precinct level that the party itself will not do.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate that that is the case, but the story again that you just told is one I've heard in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. It's one I've heard in Eastern North Carolina. It's one I've heard in Southeastern Pennsylvania and Northeastern Pennsylvania. It was the first time, I think, and I know there are others, and there were names, of course, attached to the idea of the precinct strategy. After 2020, a lot of people woke up and realized, after years of people like me trying to tell them, it really did fall on deaf ears, that a lot of this local, I mean, we all focus on the national, but the local stuff is where a lot of levers of government, are pulled. And if you're not there, you can't count a vote. Honestly, you can't get a vote out. Honestly, you can't register to vote efficiently. So, if you don't have enough people at the local level and you don't have enough people in the places where they need to be, you could be in a red county, and I guarantee you, there's a blue clerk counting your votes because they're not out there doing that work. And it was unfortunate that the people who were there, decided, when there was this influx of people for the precinct strategy, they decided not to welcome them with open arms, but instead with a guarded mentality that they're coming for what's mine. And that is very unfortunate. But everybody who tried to get involved in the precinct strategy ran into that. And it certainly stymied any effort that would have contributed to, to what the goal of that was. And so what we did in 24 was an attempt to just get around them and get around all of this. And we did a lot of research. on how to bring out or change these orphan voters. And it's something I could get into. I'm not sure we have enough time, but what we found is that, and this shouldn't have surprised anybody, these voters are very decentralized in their thinking. They actually don't react well to outsiders. So the idea of a party knocking on doors or trying to, it actually didn't work that well for them. The best way was for personal family, personal friends, coworkers, like-minded people, even gamer groups. I mean, these are things we used. People have gaming communities. It's unbelievable, but you would be surprised how many nationalists or populists, however you want to characterize them, that lean to the right. You would be surprised how many were sitting on very well-known video games and on discords, and basically we use those communities and we use those relationships to convince them that their votes mattered, and that was the hardest part about this effort. And the AP made fun of us, and CNN made fun of us, and they joked and they said, look at what some of these, Trump supporting groups are trying to do in states like Michigan. It's ridiculous. Nobody ever gets out these voters. Hunters, Minnesota. I know that you've probably heard of people like Scott Pressler and others. I think that often some of these influencer types, they do embellish some of the numbers, but it's another excellent point, another excellent community. And by the way, Don Jr. understands this. He did understand it in Minnesota. He just didn't get any support for it, unfortunately, years ago. But hunters are another community. They certainly lean toward our views. It's just that they are, going on with their lives. The hardest thing is to convince them that their vote still matters, still counts. And I mean, I know this is kind of opening the door to so much other conversation, but we found that you had to motivate those low propensity and even orphan voters, no propensity voters, in order to change the makeup of the state. And that's any part of a plan to win Minnesota. I really truly believe would have to include something like that, because you have the Twin Cities behemoth that you have to contend with. And there's another side, of course, to that, because minimizing the vote share in those areas, that's a whole other conversation. I think the way you do that is just to be honest with people and be honest with voters. But I'll digress.